Ko, a Komamai Curtain Call, a program of reviews, previews, interviews, and features of and or with the great art and artists on Maui and beyond. I'm Paul James Brown. ProArts Playhouse is presenting an adaptation for the stage of Jane Austen's classic novel Pride and Prejudice by Kate Hamill under the direction of first-time director, the executive director of ProArts, fräulein Lin McEwan. Add artistic directing to the long list of achievements this remarkable woman has accomplished. Her selections, choices, and casting are perfect. This show has a passel of newcomers to Maui stages and or ProArts. It is always wonderful to welcome new talent to Maui stages. The play explores the role of women not only in the 19th century, but it causes us to examine the roles of women today. Perfect for International Women's Month. Mrs. Bennet, the amazingly hilarious Keisha Kiki Giles, has 4 daughters and a husband, Jefferson Davis, who does not have the financial capacity to keep the place where they live. Mrs. Bennet is determined to marry her daughters off to some well-off gentleman so she can save their home. Jane, the eldest, Michaela Culver, is paired up with Mr. Bingley, Lindsay Callis, much to the delight of Mama. He makes £5,000 a year. After Jane comes Lizzie, Danielle Ferrer, who you may have seen in the recent production of Rocky Horror Show. She has vowed never to marry. Then comes Mary, Jasmine Greenberg, a pouty child who plays the piano, is subject to uncontrolled hilarious outbursts, and seems to have a serious itchiness. Finally, there is Lydia, Tabby Malapo, the youngest at 14. She is an exuberant youngster and frequently fights with Mary. Mr. Darcy, Maui's handsome young leading man, Elisha Collins, is smitten with Lizzie, but she will have none of it. She describes him as disdainful of others, self-righteous, inconsiderate, and irritating. Jane has run off with Bingley and gotten ill at his house. The Bennets descend on the home to tend to Jane, much to the chagrin of Miss Bingley, Paul Jackal, who detests the Bennets because they are déclassés. Miss Bingley is, after all, an aristocrat. Charlotte, Jefferson Davis, is a friend of the Bennets who betrays them. Mr. Collins, Paul Jackal, is another suitor who wants Lizzie. Again, Mrs. Bennet is delighted, but Lizzie is less enthusiastic. Mr. Collins is the synonym king. He is like a thesaurus on Audible. When Lizzie turns him down, marries Charlotte, who will inherit their family home. Then there is Mr. Wickham, also Paul Jackal, as a lieutenant who tries to woo Lizzie, but when she dismisses him, he turns to a surprise bride. Later in Act 2, we meet Lady Catherine, Tabby Malapo, another aristocrat who wants Darcy to marry her daughter, Miss de Bourgh, Lindsay Callis. Every time someone arrives at the Bingleys, their servant, Jasmine Greenberg, explodes into the room and shouts who has arrived. The final character is the Bennet's servant and stage assistant, Lily Werner, who is apparently having a lot of fun blowing her whistle, being a statue, bringing in letters, and announcing guests. Ms. McEwan has created one of the most hysterical, diverse casts ever seen on Maui. She has women playing men and men playing women. The Bennets are mixed race. Mother and 3 daughters are African American. And Ms. Malapo is actually from South Africa. Their firstborn Jane is lily white as can be. Apart from being tear-inducing, pee-in-your-pants hilarious, this production demonstrates that the audience will accept non-traditional casting. The most important element is the quality of the work, not keeping the traditions of the past. Bravo to Ms. McEwan for having the courage to cast the best people in roles they would never have gotten a few years ago. Every member of this cast is doing outstanding work. The complexity of the language coupled with the physical elements of the play adds up to a doozy of work for this cast, and they were absolutely up for it all the way. Miss Ferrer's Lizzie is a strong woman who is almost anachronistic. She is so today and yesterday. When Mr. Collins says the role of a lady is to know when to speak and when to hold your tongue, these kinds of strictures, the generally expected role of a lady in these times, make Lizzie crazy, and she has some marvelous scenes where she consistently refuses to allow herself to be manipulated by any man. When Darcy expresses his love for her, she rips him several new ones. Humiliation is actually mild when one sees how she mercilessly tells him exactly what she thinks of him. Ms. Ferrer's work is astounding. Elisha Collins knows Darcy. No one plays restrained gentleman better than Mr. Collins. His Darcy is naive, confused, trying very hard to be a conventional gentleman, but has no idea what that is. When he finally stands up for himself, it is such a welcome moment in the show. Ms. Giles, Mrs. Bennet, is driven not only for survival, but out of love for her girls for whom there was only one fate, to be married well and be taken care of. She pins all of her hopes for their future on the conventions of the past. A true recipe for disaster. She is delightful every moment, whether she is embracing her new favorite daughter or she is contemplating a fate with her old maid daughters. She has created a great character. Mr. Davis's Mr. Bennet is so low-key, he is off the piano. He can barely get himself out of his paper or out of his seat. When he does decide to act, he is led by his wife, who really wears the pants in that house. He gets to say the great line by John Donne, "Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." After Lizzie says for the jillionth time, she will never marry. His Charlotte, on the other hand, is so interesting. He is not trying to be a woman. His costume is more like a coat over his Mr. Bennet costume. Yet he fully engages the audience as Charlotte, and we believe he is her. We learn that Mr. Davis took over the role only 10 days before opening. That is astonishing, and you would never know it. Mr. Jekyll's three characters are so well done. He morphs from one character to the other seamlessly, and he has created three completely distinct characters. Mr. Collins is a veritable wimp who speaks in redundancies. His Miss Bingley is a true member of the bourgeoisie, full of put-downs for her lessers and praise for her betters. Then there is Mr. Wickham, the dashing young lieutenant. This character brings out the man in Mr. Bennet by his choice of wife. Mr. Jekyll is a consummate professional. As he demonstrates in Bent last season, he has no limits. Lydia is a very young 14 until she surprises us in the second act. Then Miss Malapo gives us not a mature young woman, but a crafty, selfish child who is delighted in besting her sisters. Her Lady Catherine is a real aristocrat, subdued but powerful and determined. It is a marvelous Maui debut for this outstanding newcomer. I look forward to her next role. Ms. Greenberg's Mary, along with Ms. Giles' Mrs. Bennet, are the funniest characters in the show. Ms. Greenberg has a pouty expression down, and her vocalizing is powerfully funny. She plays the servant with equal enthusiasm. Michaela Culver was seen in last season's Murder in the Nth Degree after a long hiatus from the theater. Her Jane is a proper big sister who is caught in the conventions of the time. One of her best moments was when she was ill at the Bingleys. Her congested voice was spot on. Her acceptance of the way things are was quite refreshing. As Mr. Bingley, Lindsay Callis, whose bio is not revealing, relishes and revels in this role. Her courting of Jane and her coming to terms with the reality of her situation were well done. Her Miss de Bourgh was a delightfully quirky, engaging character, and she showed that you don't need many lines to make an impact. Ms. McEwan was also the set designer. The set was clear as to each scene, and the design was such that the changes were rapid, yet they fully embraced what the scenes called for. Not to be called a slacker, Ms. McEwan was also the props coordinator. Kat Gregory and Catherine Weeks did the costumes. They were reminiscent of the period, but they were also contemporary, as all the tights were athletic socks, and the pants for the men were football pants without the padding. The show looked great. I especially liked Lady Catherine's outfit and Mr. Darcy's things. Finally, the choreography by Kalani Whitford added so much to the show, especially the big dance at the Bingley Ball in Act 1. That was so well done. Pride and Prejudice runs Thursday to Saturday at 7:30 p.m. and Sundays at 3 p.m. until March 26th. Go to www.proartsmaui.org for tickets. This is a great show that will tickle your funny bone. Don't miss it. Well, that's Curtain Call for this week. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Paul James Brown. Ahui ho!